So this is normally when you'd hear me celebrating the past week of Cavs basketball through a series of weekly awards. But I was able to land Luka from Real Cavs fans. And when you can trade for Luka, you trade for Luka. Hi, I'm Zach, and welcome to the Sports Ethos Cleveland Cavaliers podcast, your safe space to celebrate and nerd out about the Cavs. And when I say nerd out, you know what I'm talking about. We're talking hoops, backed by stats you've actually heard of. To join the discussion, use hashtag CavsCast on social media. Now, if you're a real Cavs fan, you're following real Cavs fans, at least on X or Twitter or whatever bird that we're using these days. I guess X isn't a bird. You've probably read articles on the site. Maybe you've even interacted in the forum. If that's true about you, you have interacted with my guest today. He is the brains behind the keyboard. It's Luka from realcavsfans.com. Thank you for doing this, being here, and showing your presence to our audience.
I appreciate you having me. It's always good to connect, and I'll try to think of some few puns along the way, considering we started off with a few.
You know what? The bar is set. Well, it's set low. Unless we're going back to that Luka thing, that's a pretty high bar, actually. But have I captured your title properly? Like brain czar wizard? What is it exactly that you're doing behind said keyboard for Real Cavs fans?
Just the Twitter fingers and content. So making sure that we put out some useful information and helpful things to go along the way. There's a lot of misconceptions about the cap and how roster construction plays out. So that's kind of the niche that personally like to get into. So happy to clarify a lot of those things moving forward about how all the pieces interact, especially in the apron era, which has become more convoluted and complicated than ever. But for nerds like myself who nerd out on how it all fits, that's what we're here for.
You have found your people. So I want to start with the trade. It's been a few days. I did a whole 30 minutes of my reaction breaking it down here, so I'm not going to re-spew a whole lot of that, but I want to hear yours. Just a reminder of the details in case you didn't listen to that last podcast, which you should, but wait till after this one. So the Cavs got DeAndre Hunter, and Atlanta got Karis LeVert, George Niang, 3 second-round picks, and 2 future swaps. And those swaps are in 2026 and 2028, which were already swapped as part of the Donovan Mitchell deal. So the Cavs, in layman's terms, are getting the worst out of Utah themselves and Atlanta in those 2 seasons. What were your thoughts, maybe even initially when you heard it, and then kind of like, what have you come around to now? Have you had any evolution, or are you pretty much, nope, this is where I've been from the announcement?
No, so I think this was a long time coming as far as what the Cavs could do and what they needed to consider to be better this year moving forward. So you kind of have to take a step back to look at the financial picture, go where the money says it's going. And if you looked at the books, looked at where they're going next year, you saw now was the time to make this type of move. Thinking about puns, I'd be remiss without saying Hunter became the hunted, right?
Ooh,
Gotta
well
love
done.
it. But in looking forward, so once these core 4 extensions kick in, it's going to be an expensive team. You had LeVert expiring, which we can get into a little bit later. I know we want to talk about the financials of it, but they were likely either going to retain him or lose him for nothing. Niang had a deal next year that they're probably going to try to get off of just because of how expensive their core is going to be. And when you can't have a player that plays effectively in the playoffs at that amount, that gets tricky. So understanding that they're going to be committed to 23, 24 next year for these 2 players, and then Niang was off the books, and LeVert, if you got a multi-year deal, probably in the $16, $17 million range, they essentially said we prefer DeAndre Hunter over Karis LeVert and Georges Niang for the next 2 to 3 years, and we'll expend draft equity to do so. Looking at it from that perspective, I don't think anyone is going to say that's a bad move. They committed money that they are going to spend. So this is not new money necessarily. Based off all the aprons were going to work, LeVert was probably going to get extended again, like we had mentioned. But really, this was about maximizing the window now and for the next 2 years. You have 9 to 10 guys that are locked in for the next 2 years as the core. So they believe in this team right now, understanding Mitchell as a player option, 3 years on the road. They're looking at this opportunity right now. We kind of mentioned it, previously, chemistry only gets you so far, talent get you farther. Understanding how well this team has interacted and corresponded, it sucks to lose someone like Niang and LeVert, but we saw the Celtics, move on from Marcus Smart in the essence of upgrading their talent. We saw the Knicks break up the Nova boys for upgrading their talent. So understanding those are difficult decisions you have to make, but for what they needed to duck the tax, get better this year, have controlled assets moving forward, and get a position they so desperately lacked, it's hard to be mad about all those things when you think of them together.
Yeah, I'm completely with you. I was on board for this move. DeAndre Hunter was my guy from kind of the jump that I didn't even think that they were going to be in the possible running for. Not only did I not think that they would have the assets available to get a guy like that, but also I didn't think Atlanta was going to trade him with him having a career year. But like back in the offseason, I was banging the DeAndre Hunter drum. I'm curious, where were you on the DeAndre Hunter versus Cam Johnson debate? Are you happy with the direction that they went, or would you have? Were you hoping, or would you have preferred Cam Johnson had that been an option?
I think it was close enough to where whatever the cost point was the better move. So understanding they didn't give up their 2031 first, understanding they were able to retain Jalen Tyson, understanding they were able to retain a lot of their lower cost controlled assets like Craig Porter Jr. That is a win in itself. I think Johnson and Hunter are close enough where if Hunter is acquirable at a much lower rate of what you're expending, that is what moves the needle in that regard. They're already limited to what they can trade currently with the Donovan Mitchell trade and just how they built out their assets. So if Hunter or if Johnson was going to cause a 2031 first, Jalen Tyson, you were really, really limiting yourselves moving forward as far as what kind of flexibility you'd have. Probably would say Johnson may be the better player, but when you consider the cost and considering just how they haven't been able to have a successful deal with Sean Marks for the last several years, we think back to Royce O'Neal, Bogdanovich, Dorian Finney-Smith, they still have Johnson, right? So their price was not met. So when you consider all that, what was actually obtainable was Hunter and probably for a cheaper rate. And that, in my mind, gives Hunter the edge over Johnson.
Yeah, that cost blew my mind, to be honest with you. I thought I didn't think that they would go all in for Hunter, and by that I mean adding in both like Jalen Tyson and the 2031 first rounder. But I thought when the rumors were swirling around that he was even in a possible that they were having those conversations, that there was no way they were going to get him without at least including one of them. And they got away with it without either one. That was a home run to me. So the one thing that's been particularly interesting with DeAndre Hunter, though, is while he projects as the perfect complement for the core four in that starting group, he's been having a career year coming off the bench. So I'm curious, would you start him or would you keep him in that 6-man role and, essentially just assume that he's probably going to be in most closing lineups?
Don't think you expend those assets and plan to commit to paying him that much to bring him off the bench. So there might be some easing in initially, but ultimately he was brought in to be your starter, to face Jaylen Brown, to face some of those wings, Franz Wagner in the playoffs moving forward. That is your guy. So in his year with Atlanta, going through some advanced statistics. So he was 82nd percentile matchup difficulty, 81st percentile, and the percent of the time of guarding shot creator. So that is his role that Atlanta kind of pegged him in. And he was 81st percentile in his perimeter isolation defense grade. So that man-to-man defense, that big wing defense that people have been clamoring for, that is what he's able to provide you. In addition to 39% from three, which is a career high. He's also shooting 39% on catch and shoot three-pointers as well. So again, that kind of two-way fit for what a lot of people have been saying is what he's been there for. Additionally, when you think about what has worked so well in the past years, whether it be with Dean Wade or Lauri Markkanen, that bigger wing to kind of accentuate and take advantage of the advantage they have up front size-wise, but also cover some of the size in the backcourt. That is also what he provides as opposed to Max Strus, who really is probably a two playing up to the three, not necessarily out of his element, but it's a little bit of a stretch. With Hunter, you're gaining a lot size-wise that you didn't have previously. Now, he's not going to rebound as well as maybe you would think, Off the ball, some of his advanced metrics are not really that great. 1.1% career steal percentage, 0.9 block percentage. So as much as he's known for being a quote unquote defensive guy or having that size, doesn't really show in a lot of those other areas. But for what they need, that isolation one-on-one defense, understanding Boston's probably going to try to get him the switch, and for that catch and shoot 3-point that they love with Strus and some others, that is what fits best. Now, moving forward, there's other ways you can shift to get him on the second unit. Bring him out first in the rotation, put him in the second unit as those guys get going, that you can kind of mix and match and kind of retain some of that bench scoring that he's been so good at doing. But ultimately, this is a move to enhance their starting lineup as much as it is to enhance their closing lineup. And Hunter, if it's not now, it'll probably be soon of where he starts.
Yeah, so I had a conversation with the Sports Ethos Hawks podcast guys leading up to that the most recent Hawks game that the Cavs played them. And I asked them, because that was the day that it was announced that Jalen Johnson was out for the year. And I asked him, I'm like, why is DeAndre Hunter just not moving right into that starting spot? Why is this guy not starting? And it was interesting. They told me it's been a minutes thing. They said as soon as he gets up over that 28, 29 mark that he's been playing, that's when his knee starts to swell up, and that's when those health issues become a concern with him. And so they've really, since he started the first 4 games of the season, got hurt, and coming back, he's been playing kind of out of his mind in that sixth man role, and a lot of it has been in really more of a health move for them. And so I was thinking along the same lines. I'm like, all right, he's been playing really, really well doing this. Max Strus, his metrics are insane with the core four and with the starting, when he's a starter. I'm like, maybe the Cavs really are built to just keep going with the way that Hunter's been and bring him in off the bench. But then in reflection of it and thinking back on some of those games that you got him for, right? The Celtics, for one, these are games that they've gotten off to slow starts and gotten themselves buried and in a hole. And you bring in a guy like this as your answer to some of those weaknesses. You want him out there at the beginning to try to help you not get into that hole. And I personally am not somebody that is a big fan of matchup based starting lineups. I like guys to be able to get into a rhythm and a role. It's okay if you have to mix and match throughout the game a little bit, but at least them knowing, okay, this is what I do. This is typically when I come in, this is the baseline for what my role is with this team. And then, things can shift based off of in-game adjustments as needed. I've kind of flipped my thinking on that and gone back to, no, you got to start this guy. But at the same time, I think to your point, I think he probably is the first hook from the starting five, because I do think while nobody on this Cavs team is playing a ton of minutes, I think you do want to keep him 28, maybe even a shade under with this, with this team moving forward if you can, just to try to make sure that he gets through not just the end of the season healthy, but get you through the playoffs healthy too. So I'm ultimately with you.
No, and that's one of the things that if there's a risk part of this, it's the health aspect.
Yeah.
So coming in this year, I think over the last 4 or 5 years, he's averaged about 52.6 games per year. As much as people love to hate on Dean Wade, his availability, he's been at about 53 games the last 4 years, excluding his rookie year. So when we talk about how concerned people have been about Dean's availability, Hunter has been somewhat similar to that. So as much as they can, to your point, manage minutes, manage the knee, you really want to do that. But I think if we've seen anything this year, it's Kenny's done a really good job of managing rotation, managing minutes. I think Donovan and Darius are really the only guys around that 30, 31-minute mark. You have, Mobley and Allen close to that. So he's done a good job managing that. But the other thing I think that Hunter does, in the starting lineup is it really opens up all those wing minutes for Okoro, Strus, Merrill off the bench that they were kind of blocked previously with LeVert because of that lack of positional versatility you really didn't have between all those guys. None of them could really play up to the four. Now, with Hunter in the starting lineup and his ability to play up and scale up in small ball lineups, that opens up all those minutes in, behind him. So I think I trust Kenny to do the right thing when it comes to his health and comes to how they shift it. But I think ultimately you start your best players, that's your best players, also probably your closing lineup as well.
Yeah, I agree. And that is the health is the biggest concern. And the health is the biggest concern as to why I would have been worried and trepidatious about going all in for
Mhm.
Hunter with those future assets that we're talking about with the first round pick and a Jalen Tyson who's cost controlled for a while. And you're going to need that as we talk about some of the financial implications moving forward. But yeah, to go full on, and bet everything for this guy and his availability, that is where I start to get nervous. He's still my guy as far as a basketball fit with this team is concerned, but that's where I start to get nervous. Um, but the fact that they didn't have to go all in. We're talking about swaps that were already swapped and some second rounders. I know second rounders are a valuable currency in the NBA, particularly in an apron era, but I care much more about banners than second rounders, and this gets you closer to a title contention, in my opinion, as a roster. And so you take that swing, I think, 100 times out of 100 if it's me.
No, 100%. And the two guys that they gave up are probably the two most expendable assets they had to give up. So
Yeah.
considering they were able to do that, remove someone who probably was a weak point in the playoff rotation, remove someone. Love Karras. I really appreciate how much he's morphed into kind of what they needed and done what the Cavs needed him to do. But there's a wheel. There's a reason why the spin the wheel Karras Levert was out there because of that up and down play, right? So
Yeah.
understanding that, also understanding that if the Cavs want to make a move of this caliber, they were going to have to move one of the wings, whether it be Levert, Okoro, or Strus, because of how highly paid they were. And when you talk about the CBA era, you could only fit so many guys making a certain level. So, in taking a look at some of the payrolls moving forward, you have about average of 6 or 7 guys making over $10 million a year. You have about 3 or 4 making over $20 million a year. The Cavs are going to be at about 7 or 8 next year. If you include Jerome, if you include Levert. So understanding that if they wanted to make a move, they had to move one of those guys. Levert, probably between Okoro and Strus, is probably the guy you want to move, considering his age, considering his injury history, considering his inconsistency. So understanding all that, to your point about they went in, but not all the way in, that's what made it a lot more attractive. And I'll mention 2 more points, and please tell me I'm wrong on either of these. I think they're interesting to consider when we look at the Hunter fit, one upside, one downside. One upside is he's at six free throws per 36 minutes, which would be the highest among the team this year. So I know there's a lot of talk about his dynamic scoring, or if they're losing someone to Vert. That's really not something they've had this year as far as how they get to the free throw line. Additionally, he's also been a really good post up player too. So how that can be retained in the second unit. But one downside I'm really interested to watch is how he passes the ball. So one of the things that the Cavs have done so well is the drives and the kickouts off the drive. This year, Hunter is, I think it's about, about 7% career-wise assist percentage, 8% this year. That'd be team worst. So Cavs are third in drives, sixth in pass percentage out of the drives. Hunter is 63rd percentile on drives, meaning he gets the rim, but there's only 20th percentile in passing out. So kind of curious on how we see Kenny's influence in Hunter and how he plays, but ultimately I think it'll be a really good fit based off of what he's bringing and what they need.
I agree with you. And I started looking at some of those offensive numbers, particularly the ones off of drives. And the biggest difference is that passing between he and Karras Levert. Levert passes about 50% of the time that he drives, and Hunter only passes about 25% of the time that he drives. But at the same time, DeAndre Hunter is also shooting 52% on his shot attempts when they come off of a drive, whereas Karras Levert was only shooting about 43%. And so he's more effective, I guess, finishing off the drive. Like you said, he
Mm-hmm.
gets to the free throw line more. He actually, funnily enough, as I was looking at this stuff, he and Evan Mobley's numbers on drives pretty much align 1-to-1 in almost every like market asset. It's going to look different because Mobley is obviously bigger and he goes a little bit more to postering people, although Hunter got his Wemby poster that's going to hopefully already hang on his wall from now until eternity. His grandkids should have that thing up in their house, right over the like mantelpiece too. I'm talking like where most people would put family portraits or the TV. I want DeAndre Hunter's family from now until the world ends to be his poster on Wemby. But so I guess my thought on that is, if you feel good when Evan Mobley puts the ball on the floor and with the outcome that you're getting when he drives to the basket, that's essentially the effectiveness that you're going to get with DeAndre Hunter. Plus, he shoots it at a higher volume from three. He shoots it at a high percentage from three. I know it's also been mentioned that he only shoots 38% from the corners, and that's not necessarily elite. Ironically enough, he shoots like 42% from the left corner while only shooting about 34% from the right corner, which is a weird trend that I noticed earlier in the season for the Cavs as a whole. That right corner is bad juju and cursed for them anyways. So as long as when he's with the core four, if you're going to put him in a corner, just put him in the left corner and it's going to be fine. It's going to go in and everybody's going to be happy hunky dory. So anyways, you went down that road and I remembered I pulled a few things. So I went scrambling to find those. So let's get back to kind of the financial impact and things moving forward, not just beyond this, because I think it's a foregone conclusion basically from the summer when they decided to lock up the core four the way that they did and sign all of those extensions to all the guys except for Darius, who was already locked up. They committed themselves to being a second apron team next year. There was, unless you gutted the roster completely around them, there was no way they weren't going to be in the second apron next year. And so that doesn't change with this deal. They're still going to be a second apron team next year, as they would have if they would have brought LeVert back, Ty Jerome back, unless they, again, pretty much got rid of everybody and just went, you get a minimum, you get a minimum, you get a minimum. Like you're going to be in the second apron anyhow. So I don't see the risk necessarily there being any different than if they would have stayed pat. The thing that it did do is, as you mentioned earlier, get them underneath the luxury tax line, which is something that we talked about ad nauseum leading up to the trade deadline. They were able to make their swing for improving the roster and improve their title hopes and also get below the luxury tax line. Mm-hmm. But they also left at least one roster spot open that has to be filled. And they have another one that they could fill if they wanted to. I know you wrote an article for the Real Cavs Fans website that explained a lot of this. So I'm going to let you do the honors of telling us like what their options are. Like, can they get to the buyout market? Can they only get to one guy? Can they get to two while still staying below the luxury tax line, which was part of your motivation going into this trade deadline in the first place?
And the first part you just mentioned, like, retweet, share, 100% accurate as far as why you make this move. I think there was kind of a stigma when there was a lot of talk about the Cavs ducking the tax this year, that it was Dan Gilbert being cheap, that making a financially motivated move or having that be a benefit meant reducing the talent on the team or taking a step back, when in actuality, what Kobe did so well was thread the needle of improving the team while also improving the financial flexibility of the team, which is really hard to do and what makes this move even better moving forward. So what they were able to do is get below the luxury tax. Reason why that's been so important is there's now a repeater tax, where the longer you're in the luxury tax, the more and the higher extent of what you are taxed. Additionally, there's also penalties for being in the second apron so many years, such as draft picks being frozen, meaning you can't trade them, and also draft picks being moved to the back of the first round if you're in the second apron so long. So there are significant financial penalties that we've seen teams react according to. You have Steve Ballmer, one of the richest men in the league and the richest men in the world, duck the tax this year, be afraid to pay Paul George long-term because of the financial implications. You have Dallas worrying about giving Luka Doncic a supermax because of the financial implications that it could mean committing to the wrong guy. So this is a very real thing. Adam Silver set out to reduce spending and what high-end spending looked like, and teams are acting accordingly. So what the Cavs have done is set themselves up pretty well to where they duck the tax this year, meaning they'll delay the repeater tax until a few years out. They also open up room to sign at least one player, but two players if they want to. So they're at currently 13 players. The roster minimum is 14. Teams can go at least 2 weeks without being up to roster compliance, but no more than 28 days total for the year. So basically, they have to get to 14 at some point, but they're not in a rush in doing so. They created just enough room so they're at about 1.5, 1.6 million below luxury tax that they can sign 2 veteran minimum free agents if they wanted. So if they wanted, if Bojan Bogdanovic gets bought out and you want Mo Bamba, they can fit both those guys. So not only did Kobe trade for DeAndre Hunter and trade away what they did, they also were able to eventually acquire 2 more players to add on to that. We can kind of get into more stuff too, but I mean, if you also value long-term flexibility, they can also convert, say, a Luke Travers or JT Thor to a long-term deal to get them cost control. That can be a part of this deal as well. But getting below the tax this year delays punitive financial penalties, allows them to fit in a couple of guys while staying beneath that tax, and set them up long term. So there's a lot of financial impacts that go into this that make this move even better when you look at off the court and on the books.
No, I'm with you. And I was one of those people that you kind of called out a little bit in your first part of that answer in this aspect. What I didn't, I think it's an absolute home run that they were able to do this to get DeAndre Hunter while also ducking the luxury tax. If you could do that, then I am 100% all on board. Save Dan Gilbert that money, get him in the non-tax paying pool so that they can get that money. I am all for all of that. What I didn't want to see them do is make a clearly only financial based move that hurts the team on the court. To me, you can't do that if you actually see yourself as a contender in this league. Like that's not optic wise, it doesn't work. And also just the message that you're sending to the guys in the locker room is like, oh yeah, we believe in you, except a little bit less if we can save some money while doing so. But in this kind of a move, it was absolutely a huge benefit that they were able to accomplish both things. I 100% on board for that kind of move. I just didn't want to see them go just for the finances and then be like, oh, here goes a guy that's important, but because it's also the way that they would have had to go about doing that. Because they have so many guys that are basically making minimum money, you couldn't just get rid of one of them because you still have to fill that roster spot. You're essentially, there was a way that you could do 10 days until you can't do 10 days anymore. And like, you can really, but it was so tight and would have been very, very, very difficult to make that work in the first place, just for the sake of ducking the tax, which I guess fine. I wouldn't have liked it, but go for it. More than likely, what they would have had to have done is trade away like an Isaac Okoro for a guy that makes $6 million instead of 10 to get under the luxury tax. And if you're doing that, you're probably getting worse. And that's where I was like, you don't make this team worse to save money. They got this team better and saved money. Take a freaking bow. I'm all for that. I just wanted to clear that one up.
no, and you're absolutely right. And the other part of this too is, like you had mentioned, is they're going to be a second apron team. Any way you slice it, Levert, no Levert, Niang, no Niang, Hunter, no Hunter. Based off where they're going to be a second apron team. What also comes with being a second apron team is the restrictive roster building moves. So you can't aggregate players. You can't sign and trade players you can't try and sign and trade someone to bring a player back. You can only sign minimum level players. You can only re-sign your free agents. So what that did is, understanding this summer they're going to be operating as a second apron team, they're able to utilize the roster building and transactional flexibility they have this year to make the move that they maybe could not have next year. So if they wanted to trade for DeAndre Hunter in the summer with this same package, they wouldn't have been able to, because they would have been aggregating 2 players to acquire 1. The same thing we saw Phoenix Suns have such a difficult time doing and trying to trade Kevin Durant or do what they need to do to build out the team, is what we would have seen the Cavs been in jeopardy of doing. So it was strike while the iron is hot, knowing the financial implications you're running into, taking advantage of the contractual pivot points you have with Niang and Levert, but also the league is wide open. We don't see a current dominant team. So understanding that anything can happen next year, It's not the not for long NFL league, but it really is in the NBA where so much can change so quickly because of the power of players that when you have an opportunity to be healthy, which the Cavs really haven't had the last 2 years, knock on wood, you want to see them go for it. So I think understanding all that really puts them in a good position. And last thing I'll say is, you're talking about who wants to win and owners wanting to win. Draymond Green and Jordan Schultz had a podcast, and Draymond said there's really only a handful of owners doing everything they can to win each and every year. Most owners don't want to win.
Yeah.
I think people took that as, well, of course they want to win, but owners that want to win are doing everything that they can, and not a lot of owners can say that. And so credit to Dan, because he's going to have to really want to win to pay this team moving forward. And by all intents and purposes, he probably will.
And he's done it before. I mean, obviously not with the apron situation because it didn't exist then, but he's paid out the wazoo for luxury tech. Now, granted, he's one of the richest owners in sports, so I'm not worried about where his next meal is coming from, and neither is he. But he has paid for this team to win. That part's never been a concern for me when they have a shot. We've seen him do it. It's not small market syndrome like other places have. So I wasn't too worried about that. It was more just like, because they were so close to it, how would they go about getting there, that I was like, just do it the right way. And I was in favor of taking the swing, because you don't know how long your window is open. You don't know when your next chance to, possibly play for a title is actually going to be. You can feel good about your situation moving forward, and then life things, the NBA happens, the basketball gods come and smite you. So if you feel like this team's got a shot, take the swing while you can. So back to them having at least one roster spot to fill. What would be your top priority for that spot if it was you making the decision?
I don't know if we want me making the decision. That might get us into trouble, but if I had that power, like Bruce Almighty, probably would definitely focus big. That's been a need for quite some time, considering right now they only have Dean Wade and Tristan Thompson on the roster. And don't let people forget that two-way contracts aren't eligible to play in the playoffs. So people are hoping that JT Thor can be a backup big. Nope, not unless he's converted. He cannot play in the playoffs. So they really need something behind there, given that Tristan Thompson is probably on his last legs. Dean Wade, never know what you're going to get with Dean Wade, unfortunately. So if they can find someone to provide some additional depth, now DeAndre Hunter being able to play the four, there's some insurance there, but they're really, really thin up there, not only for health, but also just for typical wear and tear, foul trouble. They really don't have anyone to stylistically replicate what Allen or Mobley can give you. Understand, not a lot of people can do that, but just we saw how beat up they got in some other series with the Knicks. The offensive rebounding, just being able to throw in a fresh body to give those guys some breathing can be helpful. So if they can find someone like that, now don't expect a rotation level player on the buyout market. It's just not what has typically happened. Marcus Morris and Danny Green were the last two guys the Cavs got. Marcus Morris played probably above his water. Danny Green looking like he was standing in water the entire time he was playing. But that is the type of level of player what we would probably see. Right now the buyout market is really, really thin. Ben Simmons was someone that the Cavs were after, but went to Los Angeles. Daniel Tice was someone who really made a lot of sense, but looks like he might be signing overseas. So at this point, when you look at the big man group, it's Mo Bamba, who may be more famous for the song than actual his play on the court. That's the type of players they're looking at, but probably focus on the big. And then, like you mentioned too, they do have flexibility for two spots. They can fill those spots without going over the luxury tax, and I would expect them to do so. And something that Kobe has really done really, really well the last few years is convert a two-way or minimum level player to a long-term cost-controlled contract. So Sam Merrill is currently on that. Craig Porter is currently on that. Mark Stevens was on that a few years back. He did it with Dean Wade. So taking advantage of those lottery tickets and seeing if they pay off, and if they do, you have those assets that are going to be tremendously important as the core and team gets more expensive. Those cheaper, lower end players become all the more important, being able to afford those higher end players. It's kind of like the plankton and the whale in the ocean, where you need one, you can't have one without the other. It's kind of what those contracts are like. So it wouldn't be surprising to see them acquire kind of a veteran level player to provide that overall depth. But also, if they like Travers, Bates, or Thor enough, convert him to a long-term contract, have that flexibility moving forward, backfill with another two-way player, and kind of take another shot and hoping that over the next 2 years when they're going to be a second apron team, having some minutes come on a cheaper contract can be really, really valuable.
Yeah, what camp did you fall in when it came to Ben Simmons? We know it's not a possibility now, but just like where were you?
A cheetah never loses his spots. So the fact that he chose to go to LA for the weather and maybe less competition says all you need to say. I know there were others that were high on him, but he was playing better this year, no doubt about that. It's just one of those things when you see how close-knit of a group they are and how much chemistry, has mattered to a certain extent. That player who hasn't competed to the extent that other players and teammates have wanted when he's been on the team, it's hard to get behind that, understanding the need, and he can probably make impact in certain situations, but just everything else that comes with it is just not juice isn't worth the squeeze. If it would have happened, wouldn't have complained. Minimum level deal with no future contractual obligations tied to him. Couldn't complain too much, but just really not the type of person that would have hoped they brought in the team. So glad that he ended up going to Los Angeles.
Yeah, it was a tough sell to me. The thing that I could have rationalized is that it was a buyout and a prorated minimum, right? Like, I think one of the biggest problems with Ben Simmons, and this is just amazing analysis on my part. Are you ready for this bomb? I'm about to drop knowledge. It's the contract. Oh, no kidding. But what I mean is you have to put up with his crap because you have so much money like tied up and invested in him. You can't just like send him home because that's whatever it is, 40 million, 50. Like, he's been on these massive contracts and you just can't really afford to do that as a basketball team. And so you're stuck with the Ben Simmons experience.
Mm-hmm.
If he would have came into the Cavs, the first moment that he started rubbing people the wrong way in the locker room, or the first time that he started to not jive, or he started to do something that was part of that now known Ben Simmons experience, you cut bait and you move on because you're not invested at all in this dude and you just don't need him messing up your locker room. Would that be unfortunate if you used that spot and used that flexibility and that have been the outcome? Yes, it would have, but it's a way less risky proposition if that were the case. And given kind of the other options for a backup big, I could have at least understood if they would have, taken that swing and he agreed. And I'd be like, okay, this doesn't feel good, but I at least feel better about the exit strategy than anybody ever has with this guy. But we don't have to worry about that. Daniel Theis is a guy that you mentioned. It's somebody that I liked as a possibility. If he does go overseas, that would be unfortunate because he is kind of that perfect. He's sort of that perfect like role and mold. He's just enough of an upgrade over Tristan Thompson, I think, at the very least situationally, that it would be worth it to have a guy like that, an option like that coming off. He's also shown some stretch to him, in his career. So he also has a little bit of a different dynamic than somebody like Tristan gives you, a little bit more of an in-between Mobley and Allen than just a replica of one of them. And I think that type of versatility could have been helpful, at least a tool in Kenny's arsenal. It would, maybe they can convince him. I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, like, I guess you could say something similar for Mo Bamba as a kind of an in between those two guys, but we've never seen it really work for more than a handful of games at a time with him throughout his career. But I guess you don't need it to work for more than a handful of games at a time if he's coming in on a buyout. Is there a name in the big pool that tickles your fancy, of guys that are known as buyout candidates, or should we go to the one that everybody is hoping becomes a buyout candidate and we just don't know what's going to happen? Caca.
And question is it the right caca that you're suggesting?
Oh,
because there's a couple different options there, but That's kind of why I think they may slow play this a little bit, where you may see them initially sign a 10-day contract, maybe
Mhm.
reward one of the two-way guys, just like they did Zaire Smith and Sharif Cooper last year, just to kind of slow play to see, is there something that's going to become available that we would rather commit our money to? So they have about 1.5, 1.6 million. They can spend it all on one player if they want. They can split it up amongst two players. So there is flexibility within that. They have their full non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which means they could spend all that 11, 12 million if they wanted to, but they're not going to because they want to stay below the tax.
Yeah.
So there is flexibility in how they play it out. You know, whether there's another big out there that's worthwhile striking right now, probably not. I think Mo Bamba's the one guy, but he's also been involved in two salary dumps last 2 years. He's been on teams where they needed a backup center in Philadelphia, Los Angeles, when they've thrown him aside just half a season in. So there is some question marks about why have other teams really not valued the Bamba experience. Within that, he's still young. He's 35.7% on threes career wise, 6.9 block percentage, 17 rebound percentage. So like a really good theoretical, stretch and defensive big, but just really hasn't panned out. Looking at some of the percentiles when he was on the court, third percentile, 18th percentile, 31st percentile as far as just overall points per 100 possessions. On the other end, you also have 82nd, 81st percentile. So it's either been really good or really bad when he's been on the court. But everything considered, like what you're getting on the buyout market, his age, his talent, that's a guy you probably want to take a swing on. To your point, though, I don't think Larry Nance will be available. The Hawks rebuffed initially a lot of trade interest in him during the deadline. So it seems like he may be someone they want to extend long term to be a backup center to Okongwu. And Capella, who took over the throne for John Collins being the Hawks big that is consistently in trade rumors, was in that. And there's been some cursory talk that maybe could he be a buyout candidate considering he's expiring. They may not have the same level of value there. However, the other kind of backside to that is, with Mark Williams going back to Charlotte, Los Angeles becomes a team who probably is needing a big more than the Cavs and probably has potentially more to offer than the Cavs. So you also have to figure out that someone coming to the Cavs is probably accepting that they're not going to get a lot of minutes on a consistent basis. So even to the extent that there is guys out there, the Cavs may not be the top landing spot for some guys who may be looking for some minutes. So within that, the big market's really thin. I think Bamba is probably your best effort right now, center wise, but they may like to wait and see what else becomes available.
Yeah, I think the LA stuff is interesting, but to those financial implications, their second apron or their first apron restricted, which means that they can't sign a guy in the buyout market that is making more than mid-level money in the contract that's getting bought out. It gets convoluted and silly, but it does at least tie their hands a little bit with a guy like a Capella, right? Like, because he's making, what is it, 20 something?
22 million. Yeah.
Yeah. So he would be probably their perfect outcome, but no, 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 you can't do it. But the Cavs could. You are now the second person that I have seen mention Clint Capella, and I did not expect him to even be in a buyout, conversation. So I'm open to it if he is. I just wasn't expecting him to pop up in those talks. So it would be interesting. If you were able to choose, if they were to use that last one, that 15th spot after they figure out whatever big they're going to probably bring in, and if you had to pick of their options on the two ways to convert into a longer term deal and kind of lock up in that way, do you lean towards one of the three more than any of the others, just based off of what we've seen so far and what you like?
So I can't say I own stock in Amani Bates. So with that, I would probably be on the latter end of the two-way available players. I think Luke Travers or JT Thor, especially if you're wanting some additional kind of Dean Wade insurance, replicatable big minutes, that makes a lot of sense, especially moving forward. You consider Tristan Thompson's a free agent in the offseason. Can
Mhm.
JT Thor show enough to where maybe he is a fifth or sixth big and is on a cost-controlled contract? So just from the aspect of team building, that makes a lot of sense. Luke Travers, there's not going to be a lot of minutes on the wing. You retain Tyson, you still have Strus Okoro, you still have potentially Sam Merrill moving forward. So there's a lot of minutes already spoken for, even going into next year potentially, where Travis may not break through, but considering what's available next year, there's a lot more minutes up front that Thor could potentially absorb. So just from the roster building aspect, you could still keep Travis in a 2-way if you wanted. Thor would make the most sense to me, not only this year, but next year. As you kind of look at 2-way guys and Bates, just to me, what skill are you really hoping he gives you when he eventually reaches it? Because he hasn't really shot well in the G League, which is what you probably want to see. He's never going to rebound well. He's never really going to pass well. Laterally, he's never really going to be too good defensively. So I just don't know what's there. Even if he does reach his potential, what's he ultimately going to be? So that's kind of what we're leading Travis or Thor with Thor getting the edge.
Luka, thank you for doing this. What do you need to plug? Is there any take that you want to get off before we wrap this thing up? The floor is yours, my friend.
No take. Only plug is make sure you follow us on X at Real Cavs Fans. Stay tuned to realcavsfans.com for content that you can nerd out on. And if you want to join the discussion, please do so, realcavsfans.com, and we'd love to have you. But otherwise, Ethos Cavs as well. Make sure you listen, applaud, comment, not heckle. Anything you need to do to stay locked in.
Thank you. If you made it to the end, please leave a like. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and use the comment section too. What would you like to do with that final spot? And what did you think about DeAndre Hunter trade? Give us all of it. But again, preferably without the heckle. 5 stars if you're listening on an audio podcast app. It would go a long way, as I always say, to showing the evil algorithms we're actually worth being shown to people. Now that the episode is over, go ahead and open up your app store and download the Sports Ethos app for one of the best blurb feeds. And it's got Cavs player news, fantasy news. There's cool tools if you're into fantasy where you can do like trade projections and different fun stuff that you can get into there. If fantasy is in your bag, go ahead and download the Sports Ethos app. As always, I'm Zach. That's Luka. Thanks for nerding out with us, Cavs fans.